Testing. Testing 1, 2, 3. Crank it up. Never mind. There's open mics everywhere. Well, if you had to watch everything you said, you'd never get anything said. I'll have the recordings up by the weekend. Let's see. Okay, so yeah, last week we finished talking about retailing. Remember that we said that retailing, the difference between a retail sale and a wholesale sale depends on the buying motive. So if we look at our traditional structure with manufacturers at the top, the intermediaries in the middle, and we can have as many intermediaries as we wish. It's fascinating. In Asian countries, you could actually have 6 to 7 intermediaries in the middle, and that is considered a very efficient channel for them. So at the top, we have our manufacturers. We would have a wholesaler somewhere here, the retailers here, and because of the basic structure, the end user, of course, who is in ours, because the end user performs channel functions. We have this wholesaler somewhere in the middle there that is going about doing their business. And many types of industries simply could not survive without the wholesalers. If any of you, just as a personal recommendation, if you ever have a chance and you're in the job hunting business and your particular assets lend themselves to the wholesaling industry and it's a good group, by all means, jump in with both feet. Wholesaling is an outstanding industry. Perhaps in many ways even better than the retailing industry. It is in its way a specialized kind of intermediary, and we'll talk about it as time goes on. But it has 100% my stamp of success. It has basically the functions of a retailer, if you think about it in the long sense, but it is much more specialized than retailers are. And this will make more sense as we go on. So let's talk about wholesaling and let's understand what wholesalers are. So wholesaling is a substantial business. It is something like 16% of the world's gross domestic product, and yet very much so, the wholesalers tend to be localized to a geographic much deeper, or certainly much deeper than retailing is. Retailing in its way is global, but for many reasons, wholesale is very local, all right? And so what are wholesalers? I'm also going to use the word distributors, and they will in essence be used back and forth, and I will mean them the same thing. If I say a distributor, I mean a wholesaler. So what is a wholesaler or a distributor? They are independently owned. They are owned and operated. They are firms that sell their products, and this is a very key phrase here to understand it, in which they claim ownership. Now, if we remember the 7 functions that the channel system performs, one of them is the physical possession. And the other is ownership. And we do separate those because physical possession does not necessarily mean that you own it. I don't own my car, me and the bank own it together. But the key thing about ownership means this, is that you can set prices and have your own purpose above and beyond what the manufacturers say. Wholesalers represent very distinct, unique sectors of the economy. They vary from industry to industry. Wholesalers tend to be specialists, and retailers tend to be generalists. Now, of course, when I say generally, it's important for you to realize that in the broad expanse, there are always exceptions. But if I were going to be nailed to the wall and demand which that is which, I want you to understand this. Wholesalers tend to be specialists, and they are in many ways the essence of what a service economy is all about. Over the last 50 years, we have seen a massive wave of consolidation through industries. But what is very interesting is that the consolidation has not meant a lowering of employment in the wholesaling. As a matter of fact, it's grown. Which talks about that the consolidation has not been about corporations being weak. They're about corporations being strong, want to be stronger. And so wholesalers, in many ways, as I said, are very much like retailers, but they're specialists. They do not sell to the end users, but their purpose is to have those goods to be sold to another intermediary who ultimately sells into the final. So way back when I was in my 20s, I worked in the oil field right out of school, and I worked in a place called Morgan City, Louisiana. Morgan City was at the base of the Chafalaya River, about 50 miles from the Gulf. Morgan City had the advantage of being right on the Chafalaya, and also it was the hub and base directly between Texas and New Orleans. Because of this unique specialized area, because of its location of oil and especially the oil patch offshore, it made it an ideal stepping location for larger corporations to come and be able to do things like crew changes, ship goods back and forth across through the Gulf Coast and into the Gulf of Mexico. Massive amounts of work got done back and forth between there. I worked for a little hardware store just at the beginning of the oil boom that was named Port Hardware. And the side that I worked for, the subsidiary within Port Hardware, was called Oilfield Warehouse. There was also 3 or 4 other small hardware stores in Morgan City. There was Morgan City Hardware. There was the Napa dealership at that time as well. They were smaller hardware stores that would be given nearly impossible orders. One of our big clients was a corporation called Kerr-McGee. And Kerr-McGee had recently got a contract which allowed them an area of something to the effect of 600 square miles in which to speculate in, found an enormous oil deposit, and came to our corporation and said, we need 200,000 feet of 1/4-inch stainless steel tubing. The reason stainless steel tubing was used, of course, is we're talking about the Gulf, where normal iron and steel oxidizes practically overnight. Stainless steel tubing, a 1/4 inch and a foot long, costs $40 a square of 1 foot. So just think, how am I possibly going to be able how are we possibly going to come up with $1 million to complete this order? Nearly impossible. Such a big order, not only that, had to be split up amongst multiple hardware stores. And here's the kicker. These things needed to be within a week or 2. Because when you're working in the oil field, they're renting every single piece of equipment that they have. They're not owning it. They rent the general oil rig somewhere at the area around $400,000 to $500,000 a day. And the big drilling platforms, the ones that are used 1,200 feet deep, generally the rental on those are anywhere from $2 to $15 million a day. You can just imagine where time is of the essence with something like that. How could we possibly, as a little corporation, be able to handle an order like that? Well, for the very same reason that the mom and pop grocery stores are able to use a wholesaler, we have the very same thing. So Port Hardware, Morgan City Hardware, the Napa dealer, there were a bunch of us. We all used one organization known as Moody Price. The Moody Price was a wholesaler that worked out of Houma, Louisiana. There are now multiple locations now. And Moody Price, through their ability as a wholesaler, were able to finance $1 million order through 3 or 4 different corporations, or pool our resources together and be able to satisfy the orders from Kerr-McGee and Conoco and all the others as well. This is the essence of what an efficient channel is that, once again, just like a mom and pop store, they can consolidate our orders together. We had a substantial bargaining power when Moody Price, with their big shoulders, came along. This in turn grew Moody Price exponentially. Moody Price started having enormous warehouses, and now you see them all over wherever there is these particular situations. It's also important to note that Moody Price didn't just serve the oil industry. They served any heavy industry that needed those particular specializations, and they did it well. So much so that they were what we call a master distributor, and we'll talk about them as well. What did Moody Price give us and give our customers? They gave us the one thing that all marketing hopes to bring: service. It can be said that wholesalers deliver service more than anything else they do. That will definitely be a key question on the test. So, wholesaling, the essence of wholesaling is service. Now, I want you to look at these names at the bottom here. These are the names of corporations that build and manufacture highly technical pieces of equipment and instruments that don't necessarily have to be used in the oil field, but be used in heavy industry all over the world. Parker Fittings, Swedgelock, MPI, all of these are corporations that build for heavy industry no matter what the heavy industry is. But what did Moody Price do? Moody Price became experts in the oil industry, or excuse me, the petroleum industry. That was their focus. They could take generic pieces like Techline, Siemens, Ralph, Parker, all of those, and understand its value to the oil field and become expert consultants on those particular goods. And so, more than just simply these things that Moody Price did, they did much more than this. If we look at the services that Moody Price brought along, and if the click works, if you notice, they have schools. They can teach as well. So if you're looking at micro certifications in things such as especially high pressure hoses. I used to work on hoses myself when I was just getting out of school. You cannot imagine what you need to know to be able to develop a custom fitted hose that is able to stand 40,000 PSI, pounds per square inch. It is a specialized, rarefied field. And what Moody Price will do is bring you to a school and help you learn exactly those things. Once again, this is a wholesaler doing more than just simply selling goods. They're repairing equipment. They have rentals. A piece of equipment to be able to make a hose that can withstand the pressure of 40,000 PSI. Generally, the way they calculate it is the number of PSI equals the number of dollars that it would take to buy that equipment. So 40,000 PSI requires you to buy a piece of equipment worth $40,000. It's just that special. But if I can rent one just for a couple of days, can you imagine the benefits of that versus a piece or equipment to make a hose that I might need once in a while? But it's more than that as well. You learn management systems. How about Kanban system just in time? How about doing a cycle count? Those kind of things. All of these things that a Moody Price does, and long story that I should shorten up is basically this is the essence of what a good wholesaler does is they provide you expertise that you may not necessarily have. They did it so well, they took part of our business, but there was plenty of business back then. Excellent location. And as I said, if you have talents that equate themselves to wholesalers, it's money in the bank. It's a good way to live. Now, what I also said about ownership means that you set prices and you have your own purposes. This is the same thing that Moody Price does. They set their prices, they specialize it to the oil field industry, and also understand that they're not normal circumstances when you need a 40,000 PSI hose that's going on a platform 200 miles offshore where it's costing $4 million a day to run the thing. You can imagine all the things that have to go on. So what brought about consolidation? Just like retail, wholesaling is labor intensive, but it also can be repetitive as well. Consolidation by IT meant that things such as picking, which is the need to pull goods off the shelf so that they can be shipped, can be done in a much more efficient manner. Yeah, I am too. Interestingly enough, the individuals were not laid off because they needed the people. They just made it more efficient. It meant that the organizations and the corporations could do things faster. And that was the essence of what the IT technology brought. It was a win-win situation. It's not like when two banks come together and let's say, let's fire one of the IT companies, which they did for me. They needed this to make themselves better. So is there a way to kind of imagine this consolidation? There are, and we'll talk about it later, but I want to talk about what Moody Price also was. They were what are known as a master distributor. Master distributors sell to other distributors, and in many ways, we were wholesalers ourselves. It just depended on the buying motive of the consumers. We built hoses for boat corporations, Swift Boats, Arthur Levy, those corporations, so that they could rent their boats to others. And so if you distribute to distributors, what's known as a master distributor. Many of the services that they bring are services that are provided by the manufacturers, but as I said, they are more finely tuned to the industries that they work in. They're more effective, they're more efficient, they understand the organizations. You don't have to translate what your condition is in a way that they can understand it. I wish I had a nickel for every time I heard it. I got it, Chief. They understood. Where other organizations are have to go in to kick their way upstairs to be able to find out what's going on, not with them. Time is money. Master distributors can do all of the things that a manufacturer can do, but they can also do other things as well. They can extend credit. They can become warehouses. They can become silent partners in your organizations, and for a fee, provide you with the expertise you need to grow. I used to have a friend of mine who was an expert on AutoCAD. I don't know if you know what it's a computer-aided design package. It came out in 1983. Victor Computers came out. Originally, the PCs, especially the ones that were not color, the fine-tuned pixels on just a black and white were outstanding. Lester was one of the best I had ever seen. He had his own corporation, and for a limited fee, he would come in and do all the training for us, and he would also train us as well. He, in his way, was that essence, a master distributor. And okay, we're talking $1980. You never worried about spending $200 an hour with Lester, because Lester could do something in 5 minutes that would take someone else 2 hours. And so, far from being difficult for them, master distributors are the ones that break loose and run, while other corporations are trying to figure out where they are. Good places to work. As I said before, they're more than just simply the deliverer of pieces of equipment. They consolidate minimum orders together. Many times you don't even have a minimum. You can have just one of one thing and they'll be able to fill the order. They act like a franchisors in that they help you sell your particular skill sets. They will finance you if you need financing. They, in their essence, Moody Price had a way of being able to resolve logistic and support problems that other corporations couldn't. So along with these quarter-inch stainless steel tubing, quarter-inch fittings, stainless steel fittings averaged around $60 to $80 each. And so when you have an order for 2,000 of those, and they need it next week, you can imagine the kind of chaos and the dollar signs that are going up in everyone's head. It's not sold until it's in the hands. And they can resolve those issues by efficiencies that regular corporations simply don't. And so wholesalers are intermediaries, very specialized intermediaries. They sell their services. They provide great value to their distributors and to the retailers. They are traditional in their way, but their ability to serve is beyond just merely the goods that they sell. It is also their experiences, their technique, their expertise, and their finances. They're good partners to have. There are also ones that you don't have to necessarily be authorized dealers for. So we had, when I was working at Omni, after I got laid off, I worked for Omni Computer Store in Lafayette. And we had a corporation, or excuse me, we had a school that always wanted to buy their computers from us, no matter what we sold. They were one of the first labs set up in Lafayette. They had a high school lab of Commodores 64s, taught basic on those things. They would want to buy 10 of those from us at a time, and we're Commodore dealers. But we had kind dealerships that would sell them to us at like a 10% discount, so we'd make some money off of it, but they would provide us with their knowledge and expertise without any extra money. So it filled enormous gaps. So what are the other people that go along in wholesalers that are beyond just merely the corporations themselves? Supply chains or demand chains, as this says, is very complex. Once again, place is the most expensive of the 4 Ps. It's the most difficult to change. It's the most difficult to manage. But just remember, in a complex supply chain like that, not everything fits in the same way it does everywhere else. And so 2 of the most important groups are what are known as agents and brokers. And so what is the difference? An agent is a salesperson, or a wholesaler, doesn't necessarily have to be. But they are salespeople who do not take title of the goods that they sell. That is the primary. Agent is a salesperson that represents a corporation that does not have title of the things that they sell. And so it's not surprising when we talk about real estate that they call them agents, because of course they don't own what they're selling. Agents are the toughest of the tough salespeople. They make the most money, and they're only paid when goods are sold. So there is no salary to be an agent. You're paid strictly commission. And another one of my crazy jobs when I was trying to find my way was I was a salesperson at Con Appliances. There's one in Gastonia. They've gone out of business now. They were cheats. You just have no idea. I lasted about 6 months because that was about as much as my stomach could handle. But anyway, they had a commission set so that you would make 15% of the net. There's many ways of doing it. It could be a percentage of the sale, percentage of the net. If I sold something and the company cleared $100, I got $15. Now, let me say this. The second month before I was going to leave for Christmas, I cleared I did not sell, but I cleared $8,000. That was on $400,000 in sales. And that was after I paid everything was paid off. Agents are usually the best of salespeople. It takes a lot to be able to know that I don't make any money today unless I sell something. Got to be in a different area in your life. But those that are willing to stomach it or those that can handle it are the best. So that's what an agent is. An agent only represents one side of the transaction. A broker represents both sides. Generally, a brokerage has a piece of property. They bring the buyer and the seller together and negotiate for both sides. Generally, brokerage is in real estate. You don't find brokerage in other things. Or I should say, capital equipment. In other words, large pieces of equipment. They are critical, and they're critical in service industries, once again, because it's their knowledge and expertise that makes the sale. The last person or last participant in it is what's called a 3PL, which is a third-party logistics provider. They are specialized intermediaries. Their charge is strictly for an activity that they perform. And that is after the service has been finished. So we're going to stay in the oil patch for a little bit. Hold on. Okay. Okay. So what is a hot shot? Hot shots come directly from the oil field once again. Hot shots usually are about deliveries from point A to point B. And a critical thing, especially in the oil industry, is hot shots are there when you must get something at a particular time. So there's a show on, I forget what it is, but it's trucking across the United States where they do a reverse, what do they call it? A reverse bidding, so that you bid lower and lower and lower to deliver a piece of goods across the United States. I forgot what they call it. Anyway, this is the essence of what a hot shot is. Remember, we're talking about, this is the oil field again, where it doesn't matter how much it costs to get something somewhere, but it's got to get somewhere in a certain amount of time. So that's why they call it a hot shot, okay? Not unusual for them to slightly exceed the speed limit. It is not unusual then for corporations to look the other way. I've heard of them paying for speeding tickets when they have to. But what a hotshot is a third-party logistics provider which provides transportation from one point to the next. They are specialized in, quite simply, because they only look at urgent transportation, ones where you have to get something from point A to point B. This is not the only 3PL, but third-party logistics providers provide transportation. They provide inventory and inventory storage. They're generally contracted because they're responsible for the goods that they move across the United States. 3PLs are independent, specialized, and once again, focused on one unique service that they can provide better than someone else. And so in the list, we have agents, which are salespeople that don't take title, which represent one side of the transaction. Brokers, who generally are, let me kind of explain this as well. Brokers, individuals come to brokers to have them sell their particular piece of equipment. And they go find buyers and sellers to do this. And once again, I talk about real estate because real estate is such a complex transaction. You need specialists to be able to do it properly. And then finally, third-party logistics providers, which are working on an activity, and they usually have some kind of traditional markup to be able to get a good from A to B. So, what are some of the strategies to create some sort of success within wholesaling? This is a 10-point bonus question coming up. What goes on in wholesaling is huge, it's important, but rarely does the buyer ever see it. Manufacturers, customers, and everybody always underestimate the three great challenges of wholesaling. And what is it? The three great challenges of wholesaling is to do the job correctly with no errors, to provide the maximum benefits and service, which is doing the job effectively, and then finally to do the job efficiently, which is the lowest possible cost, and this is the zero concept. There's a word called parsimonious, which means all of this together. It's perfect, it's maximum best, but it's the lowest cost. Customers quite simply only see the top level and never see what goes on in the bottom. I got an order from Herema, which is a Netherlands corporation, to outfit a boat that was coming out of the shipyard in Morgan City, and they wanted $82,000 worth of equipment, and they needed it the next day. And you can imagine the kind of chaos that would go on with that. And fortunately, my boss more than happy, especially it was this $82,000 order. But just try to think of those three things doing right when the invoice was 12 pages long and we were trying to get all of this done before they left. They didn't matter to them what they had to do. And did they boy, did you bet. And we underestimated what needed to be done too. We got it done. But wholesaling is not easy breezy. So where do we find this history of how wholesaling works? And the example that the book uses, and it's an excellent example, is the pharmaceutical industry. If you look at the United States from the 1700s to today. So the drug trade, the legal one, in the United States started about the 1700s, and there were no pharmacies, pharmaceuticals in the United States for 200 years. What you would have is you would have a bunch of doctors get together, take one doctor, give them sufficient funds, they would all place their orders together and they would sail to England. Generally, we're talking about a voyage of, if you're lucky, it's 6 weeks. If it's normal, it could be anywhere from 3 to 6 months. That one doctor would have all the orders of a dozen doctors, They would, and in a way, it's actually efficient because you have the economies of scale working, because he was doing a single purchase for all of them. Go there, get the goods, and then finally sell back to the United States. It wasn't until the 1840s and 50s, and then a dramatic change, of course, when the Civil War came along and the desperate need for medicines to be able to hopefully make some of these gentlemen succeed or survive, that you started to see a real pharmaceutical industry in the United States. Realize this, up until the Civil War and 10 years after, there was no such thing as tranquilizers so that an individual went under during surgery. Now, just imagine that. But the need pushed the ability to find those things to be able to help people survive. In England, oh gosh, I'm gonna blank on his name. Anyway, they actually had an individual who found, so a fad was nitrous oxide, laughing gas. And one of the surgeons in England considered the idea that maybe this could help in surgery, and it actually did. So instead of desperately rushing through surgery in 5 minutes, you could perform surgery in hours. And there was a dramatic leap in life expectancies after that. That brought about the dramatic increase of medications and drugs because the survival rates jumped dramatically as well. So once that happened, you started to see the investment in pharmaceuticals and pharmacies in the United States. You started to see the pharmacy as a retail outlet being viable. And you found that there were other things such as personal beauty aids that became consistent as well. And because pharmacies became the center locations in cities, you also saw other things such as restaurant bars there as well. So all of these things expanded the use of pharmaceuticals and pharmacies in the United States. You also saw, and this is where they became so enamored with medications that they decided, it's great if they noticed that children were placated if you gave them some cocoa leaves before they went to bed. All right. Queen Victoria had some marijuana tea in the afternoons and got a little buzz going on. Then they all of a sudden realized that they were coming up with a generation of addicts. And so this is when you started to see them dialing it down a little bit. Everything comes with a cost, unfortunately. However, what they found is that pharmacies and pharmaceuticals became not only accepted, but a unique location in the cities as well. But still you had local pharmacies and there was very stiff competition. And so what you found, however, is that in the middle of the 20th century, you started to see larger wholesalers, regional locations, but then you also saw the industry of pharmaceuticals where the fine tuning that needs to take place started happening as well. But as I said, you started to see health aids in pharmacies because that was the promotion of health, and then beauty aids, which was a natural follow along as well. Now, realize the major soft drinks in the United States all started in the South. So Coke started in Atlanta, Cheerwine started here. Oh gosh, which one I'm blanking on? The one that started in North, not Cheerwine, but another one. Yes, thank you. Yes. Tennessee started Mountain Dew. You know what Mountain Dew means, by the way? It means moonshine. That's what Mountain Dew really means. It's Tennessee tranquilizer. Right? That's where they got the name from, okay? But all the fountain drinks basically came from pharmacies as well. Well, you saw this come along. All of a sudden, the number of drug wholesalers dropped from 78 to 96, from 147 to 53. And now I think there's only 5 firms that have, I think it's 80% of the national market. And why did it take so long? One of them is that it was very localized, once again, as an industry. The wholesale industry you were talking about very dangerous pharmaceuticals that required a certain amount of trust to be able to get the acceptance through. But there was another thing that they were waiting on as well, and that once again, that was automation. Wholesalers gather, process, and use the information to facilitate the transactions. It was the modernization of the wholesaling industry that could not be accomplished until we had a successful or an efficient infrastructure and technology. Once we climbed to a given level where the economies of scale took over, where we had a significant structure down that could efficiently move goods in pharmaceuticals just like you could across the United States, you started to see advantages. Up until 1980, a human being had to count every single pill that was put in every single bottle. Can you just imagine the time or the mistakes that can happen at the same time? It took automated processes to be able to make these things happen, and that did not happen overnight. Large structures also can absorb risk. It meant that the goods to be put in the right hands at the right place at the right time was now possible. And in essence, what they can do is transform the industry, especially to B2B buyers, where they constitute manufacturing functions, which is, remember, breaking bulk is one of the most important. They transform those goods into sizes that are efficient and ones in which you can make a profit. Economies of scale had to catch up. So we're going to skip over this part. And you know what? This next part is going to be very difficult, and I want to leave this for a little more time. It's 1:20 right now, and I have a meeting in about 10 minutes. So let's break here, and I will see you Thursday, and we will finish wholesaling, and then we'll talk about my favorite subject, franchise. Have a good day. See you Thursday.
Hey,
You're welcome.